It is our pleasure and great honor to have a great friend from Ireland, Michael O'Connor, and thank you very much for visiting Thessaloniki and coming to our EBAN Congress, and thank you very much for coming to the premises of Thessaloniki Innovation Zone. So, Michael, if you can tell us please a few things about yourself and the organization that you represent.
Okay, I come from the startup world. I'm a technologist, engineer, built businesses around the world as a startup guy with venture capital, usually market entry, usually in the United States. And I came back to Ireland really to get involved in helping and working with early stage companies and putting something back into that. And I did that, and I had the great pleasure of bringing the delegation from Enterprise Greece and my friend Panos to Cork for the conference last year. And now I'm here, I'm really delighted to see the activity level and the numbers that are going on here. But some comments on my time and what happened in these may be helpful or indicative to you in the future. So a critical element in bringing together all the actors to get momentum, to get impact, is to have all the players involved. That's not necessarily people sitting on the sidelines looking in, but all involved in some way in contribution or in employment or in some way. So sometimes making that industry-led helps, and then to work out which programs fit into that to create that momentum. And so what we did years ago around the IT industry was to bring together all the players. These were the startups, the multinationals, some leaders from that, general managers, etc. The academic community, some leaders from that, and put them into an organization or allow them to create an organization that would drive an initiative forward and create impact and put the name of what is happening, give it a name, and put it on the zone, market it internationally, and market to the national players and the international players that this is where it all happens and this is why. And the most critical thing in that is that you've got to get the empowerment of the private sector and the academics, and that's really difficult to get both of those together. So what we did is we set up a company, or we got the private sector to set up the company, and without shareholders. So there's no shareholders in this, there's no money. So everybody expects something to happen and they throw money at it. And we had a history of seeing what had happened whereby organizations, in particular government organizations, had funded regional initiatives and put in lots of money and created a brand and registered the brand, and the private sector came along and many other players came along while the funding was in place. As soon as the funding started to reduce, they stopped being involved. So they never gave it their true heart, and all these organizations died after a period of time. So they were lacking on emotion, they were lacking on drive, and lacking on impact, ultimately, when measured. So the critical thing is to fund the initiatives that are created by this overall initiative and thrust. And people will do that. And certainly you find that some of the private sector players leave and do startups. They become business angels. They take on roles in companies that nobody would have thought about. Sometimes then the academics from the university leave because they see the energy in the room with the early stage players. They build teams. They think outside the box. And then it all came to, what are we going to do to create a major initiative or put ourselves on the map? And we said, well, why don't you organize a conference? How do we do that? Just get a few people in and organize a conference, as you're doing here at this moment in this delightful city. And so we did that, and the conference made money. And that was the deal, make money and therefore fund the organization. So suddenly the private sector players were actually generating revenue for the organization. And as a result of that, then it had financial independence. And so it was a very great initiative. That was 26 years ago. And that organization is still in existence and growing and internationally famous. And the particular thing then is government and the national enterprise statutory bodies came on board, and they also said, what does industry think about this? about initiatives. One was broadband capacity in networks. Another was, is there sufficient R&D funding? What things should be funded in R&D that can create employment and momentum? And so often the conferences were set up around that, and we brought in the best in the world to speak at those conferences. And that drew a crowd, and suddenly the best in the world were looking at what was happening locally in Cork and saying, where do all these people come from? And why do they think like this? They're at the leading edge of innovation and the thought process. So it's vitally important that you get that momentum, and you get it driven by private sector players who have to volunteer to be there and not employed to be there.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, super.
Just one final note on that. The numbers that came out of that, we ran within it a rapid incubation or acceleration program at the time, and we did 10 companies a year, and we funded them for that year with money and initiatives and everything else. The output of that was, out of those 100 companies, 10 failed. In other words, they didn't succeed, and they gave up and went back to a regular job. Usually it was in the private sector, and usually a good job, because we had to make sure the condition of entering the program was that they gave up their job. We had to see the tax certificates and everything else. And so 90 succeeded in business, and those 90 never went back to be employed again. They carried on working for themselves or in a high growth company. Of the 90, 40 succeeded to scale. In other words, raise seed rounding and go to other levels, employ 10, 20 people upwards. And another 50 approximately stayed self-employed, and 5, 10 numbers employed, but self-employed, and never went back for another job employed by somebody else. And of the 40, about 20 really scaled, employing anything from 20 to 3,000 people, with many exits. And those exits will be from 50 million to 400 million. So there is the capacity to get that engine movement over a 5-year period or more, and create a lot of impact. And that becomes a role model to build upon many other things, and actually brings in venture capital investors and also angel investors, because the product is there to invest in.
Great, thank you very much.